My name's Claire, and I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd go to HR crying about a boss. I've always been the keep your head down, get your work done, don't make waves type. But when you're being slowly torn apart, day after day, by someone who has power over your paycheck, your projects, your reputation, eventually you break. The first time I walked into HR, I remember clutching the strap of my bag so hard my knuckles turned white. My manager, Daniel, had just humiliated me in front of the whole department for the third time that week. It wasn't even about work. He'd looked me up and down, smirked, and said, "Are you sure you want to present looking like that?" As if my voice, my research, my effort, all of it could be dismissed because of the dress I'd chosen that morning. The laughter from a couple of his favorites echoed in my ears long after the meeting ended. I sat at my desk shaking, staring at my screen, unable to breathe. That was the moment I decided, enough. When I explained this to HR, I thought they'd listen. I thought that's what HR was there for, to protect employees from harassment, to step in when a manager crossed the line. Instead, the HR rep gave me a practiced smile, tilted her head like she was a kindergarten teacher listening to a child whine, and said, "Claire, sometimes personalities clash. Maybe you just need to work on not taking things so personally." My stomach dropped. I walked out of that room with my heart pounding, my face hot, and this terrible realization sitting in my chest. No one was going to save me. Not HR, not my team, not anyone. Before I dive deeper into how this all spiraled, and trust me, it gets insane, I want to pause and ask you to hit that like button and subscribe. Because what I'm about to share isn't just another bad boss story. It's proof that sometimes the people who are supposed to handle problems are the ones protecting them. And it's also the story of how one small employee with the right proof can bring down two powerful people in one move. You don't want to miss the way this ends. Now, back to Daniel. On paper, he was everything a company wanted in a manager: charismatic, results-driven, efficient. But behind closed doors, he was toxic. He didn't manage. He ruled. He had favorites, usually people who laughed at his cruel jokes, and everyone else was treated like we were lucky just to have jobs. If you disagreed with him, you were uncooperative. If you outperformed him, you were arrogant. And if you tried to avoid him, he hunted you down, leaning over your chair with that smug little grin like he was daring you to push back. For me, it started with subtle things. He'd forget to CC me on emails, so I'd show up unprepared for meetings. He'd take credit for my research when presenting to higher-ups, brushing off my contributions as team effort. And whenever I did get recognition, he'd make sure to undermine it. Once, after I got an email from a senior VP thanking me for solving a major client issue, Daniel walked past my desk, leaned down, and whispered, "Don't get used to that. You're not as indispensable as you think." Every day I went home feeling smaller. My confidence, my voice, my energy, it all started eroding. And every time I tried to push back, HR acted like I was overreacting. The worst part? I wasn't the only one. A coworker, Jenna, pulled me aside once in the bathroom. Her mascara was smeared, her hands trembling as she tried to fix her makeup. "He told me if I wanted better projects, I should smile more," she said, voice cracking. She laughed bitterly. "Can you believe that? It's 2023 and he's still pulling crap like this?" But when I urged her to go to HR with me, she shook her head. "They won't do anything. They never do." That's when I started paying closer attention to the patterns, to the way complaints seemed to disappear into thin air, to the way HR always backed Daniel, no matter what. Something was off. One day I finally got my answer. I overheard Daniel talking to the head of HR in the break room. Their voices were low, but the words were clear enough. "Don't worry, I'll handle her. You just make sure this doesn't go upstairs." I froze. My blood went cold. In that moment, I realized the ugly truth. HR wasn't ignoring me because they thought I was overreacting. They were ignoring me because they were protecting him. I walked back to my desk that day with a new kind of determination burning inside me. They wanted to cover for him? Fine. but I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I started keeping records. Every insult, every threat, every meeting where he cut me off. I saved emails. I documented conversations. And when I realized Daniel was slipping, forgetting who he'd lied to, contradicting himself in front of different people, I knew I had something even more powerful than a complaint. I had proof, and if HR wouldn't listen to me, I knew exactly who would. The real breaking point came during one of our weekly all-hands meetings. Daniel was standing at the front of the conference room with his usual smug posture, sleeves rolled up like he was some kind of visionary leader. He was reviewing quarterly metrics when he suddenly turned to me, his voice sharp enough to cut through the room. "Claire, why don't you explain to everyone why your team is behind schedule? Or would that require you actually doing your job?" The words hit me like a slap. 25 pairs of eyes swiveled toward me. My throat went dry. We weren't behind schedule. In fact, my team was the only one that had hit every milestone. But Daniel had deliberately withheld the most recent updates I'd sent him, so on paper it looked like I was lagging. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but he cut me off, waving dismissively. "Never mind, don't waste everyone's time." The room filled with awkward silence. No one said a word. Not one person spoke up. Daniel smirked, satisfied, and moved on with his presentation like nothing had happened. When the meeting ended, I sat there, frozen, staring at my notepad. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't pick up my pen. Jenna slid a sticky note onto my desk before leaving. 3 words scribbled in messy ink. "You're not crazy." That night, I cried in my car in the parking garage, too embarrassed to drive home. I'd worked so hard, stayed late, gone above and beyond, and none of it mattered. Daniel could rewrite reality with a sentence, and HR would back him every single time. But humiliation was only one part of his playbook. The other was sabotage. Emails would vanish from my inbox. Messages I knew I'd seen suddenly gone. Deadlines I'd set on shared calendars would mysteriously be changed. Client calls would be rescheduled without my knowledge, making it look like I'd dropped the ball. And every single time, Daniel acted innocent. "Maybe you just forgot to send it. Maybe you clicked the wrong button. Claire, you really need to be more organized." It was gaslighting on a professional scale, and it worked, at least at first. I started second-guessing myself. Was I overreacting? Was I losing my grip? But then it started happening to other people. A junior analyst told me her project files disappeared after Daniel had helped reorganize the server. Another colleague swore she'd submitted a report, only for Daniel to insist he never received it. Patterns don't lie. I went back to HR again, this time with specifics. I explained the deleted emails, the rescheduled calls, the missing files. I laid it all out carefully, logically, hoping they'd see this wasn't just a personality clash. This was targeted sabotage. The HR director, a polished woman named Marissa, listened with that same tight smile I'd seen before. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. "Claire, we've reviewed your concerns, and frankly, it seems like you're interpreting normal managerial oversight as harassment. Daniel's a high performer. Sometimes his methods may feel direct, but that doesn't mean they're inappropriate. I'd encourage you to work on developing more resilience." Resilience. That word burned in my brain. Like the problem wasn't Daniel's behavior, it was my inability to handle it. I walked out of her office numb. It felt like I was in quicksand, sinking deeper every time I tried to climb out. The harder I fought, the faster I was pulled down. And then came the incident that changed everything. We were preparing a major presentation for a potential client, a deal worth millions. I'd stayed late for weeks perfecting the slides, running numbers, double-checking projections. The night before the pitch, I saved the final version on the shared drive and went home exhausted but proud. The next morning, I opened the file in the conference room to rehearse and froze. The deck was destroyed. Slides were missing, charts were misaligned, data was scrambled. It looked like a first draft written by someone who didn't understand the basics. I knew exactly who had done it. Daniel walked in 10 minutes later, coffee in hand, and saw me frantically trying to fix it. He smirked. "What's wrong, Claire? Can't keep your work straight." My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I wanted to scream at him, to tell everyone what he'd done, but he leaned down, close enough that only I could hear, and whispered, "No one will believe you." And the terrifying thing was, he was right. HR had already chosen their side. We lost that client. Daniel blamed me in the debrief. HR nodded along, and I realized if I didn't do something drastic, I was going to lose more than just clients. I was going to lose myself. So I made a decision that night. I wasn't going to just complain anymore. I wasn't going to beg HR to save me. I was going to fight back, quietly, patiently, with proof he couldn't erase. That was the night I bought a second hard drive. The first time I hit record on my phone during one of Daniel's meetings, my hands were shaking so badly I had to keep them under the table. I wasn't sure if it was even legal. I Googled it 3 times before deciding it was worth the risk. In my state, one-party consent meant I could record conversations I was a part of. And trust me, I was a part of plenty. That day, Daniel was berating me for missing a deadline he had quietly moved on the shared calendar. I knew I hadn't missed it, but hearing him say it out loud, so confidently, made me doubt myself again. Until later, when I played the recording back in my apartment. There it was, his voice, clear as day. "I changed the date. You should have checked." I sat on my couch, staring at the waveform on my phone screen, and felt something I hadn't in months. Power. It was small, just one recording, but it was a start. Proof. Real proof. From that day forward, I documented everything. I started forwarding emails to a personal account the moment they came in, so they couldn't vanish without a trace. I took screenshots of calendar changes, file edits, Slack messages. I even started keeping a physical notebook in my bag, jotting down the time and date of every questionable interaction. At first, it felt paranoid, like I was living a double life, regular employee by day, silent investigator by night. But then the pieces started to fit together. One recording caught him admitting that he'd reassigned my project to one of his favorites because Claire doesn't need the spotlight. Another captured him mocking Jenna in front of 2 male colleagues, laughing as he said, "She's emotional, can't handle stress." And then came the gold mine. Late one evening, I stayed behind to finish a report. The office was almost empty, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional click of someone typing. Daniel didn't know I was still there. I heard voices in the break room, his and Marissa's, the head of HR. I crept closer, heart pounding, and set my phone on the counter near the doorway, screen down. Marissa's voice was sharp, annoyed. "I've had 3 complaints about you this quarter. You need to be more careful." Daniel laughed. "Don't worry, they'll never stick. You'll bury them like always." My stomach flipped. My suspicions weren't just right. They were confirmed. HR wasn't failing me because they were incompetent. They were failing me because they were complicit. I picked up my phone with trembling fingers, pocketed it, and walked out of the office like nothing had happened. But inside, my brain was on fire. That night, in my tiny apartment, I played the recording over and over again. Each time, it hit harder. Daniel admitting he relied on HR to protect him, Marissa confirming she covered for him. It wasn't just a toxic manager anymore. It was corruption. I started building a digital folder on my hard drive labeled Insurance. Inside were subfolders, emails, recordings, notes, screenshots, each one meticulously dated and cross-referenced. If Daniel claimed I'd missed a deadline, I had screenshots showing the original timeline. If HR said no one else had complained, I had audio of Jenna crying in the bathroom after he threatened to tank her performance review. Piece by piece, I was building a case they couldn't ignore. The strangest part? With every file I added, I felt less afraid. It was like stacking bricks into a wall between me and them. every insult, every threat, every sabotage attempt. It all became evidence, fuel, proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't incompetent, that I wasn't alone. I started walking into work differently. I still kept my head down, still played the role of the quiet one, but inside I had a secret. They thought they were untouchable. They thought HR was their shield. But I knew better. The irony was, the more I documented, the sloppier Daniel became. He'd get careless, contradicting himself in meetings. He'd make promises to one person, then deny them to another. He'd leave a paper trail of lies, confident no one would dare challenge him. I dared. The first time I pushed back, just a little, I saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes. He accused me of dropping the ball on a client call. Normally, I would have stammered an apology, but instead, I pulled up the email thread on the projector in front of the whole team. Clear as day, it showed him moving the call without notifying me. The room went silent. Daniel's face twitched, just for a second before he forced a laugh. Must have been a mix-up. He moved on quickly, but I caught the way a couple of coworkers exchanged glances. For the first time, I felt the balance shift. Not all the way, not enough, but a crack had opened. Still, I knew one thing. A crack wasn't enough. If I wanted real change, if I wanted justice, I'd have to aim higher than HR, higher than Daniel. I'd have to go straight to the top. But I couldn't just walk into the CEO's office with a folder of accusations. I needed timing. I needed precision. I needed Daniel to hang himself with his own rope, and he was about to hand me the perfect noose. The noose appeared on a Wednesday morning. I'll never forget the way the office buzzed with nervous energy that day. We had a huge client presentation scheduled, the kind that could make or break our quarter. Everyone had been working late nights to prepare, myself included. I had put together a detailed financial model and risk assessment report, the backbone of our pitch. It wasn't flashy, but it was the kind of thing executives ate up. Numbers, projections, strategy. I triple-checked every calculation, polished the slides until they gleamed. The night before, I emailed the final version to Daniel, per protocol, and saved a backup copy on my personal drive. Something told me I might need it. When the meeting started the next morning, the CEO himself, along with half the executive board, was seated at the long mahogany table. The air was sharp with tension. Daniel stood at the front, clicking through slides like he owned the room. And then my stomach dropped. The numbers were wrong, not just wrong, catastrophically wrong. Growth projections inflated to fantasy levels, risk models conveniently stripped out, and cost estimates slashed in half. It looked like something out of a sales brochure, not a professional analysis. Daniel was presenting my work, but altered beyond recognition. Claire prepared these numbers, he said with a smirk, clicking to the next slide. As you can see, our risk exposure is minimal, and the client stands to gain substantial returns. I felt every pair of eyes swing toward me. My cheeks burned. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. He had just credited me with fabricating numbers that would never stand up to scrutiny. One of the executives frowned. "Claire, can you walk us through how you arrived at these risk figures?" My mouth went dry. If I defended myself, I'd be openly contradicting my manager in front of the CEO. If I stayed quiet, I'd take the blame when the numbers collapsed under review. Daniel leaned casually against the table, waiting, daring me. I forced a steady breath. These figures aren't mine. My original report had significantly different projections. I'd be happy to provide the unaltered version. The room went dead silent. Daniel's smirk faltered. For a split second, he looked like a mask had slipped. But then he chuckled. "Claire must be mistaken. Maybe she's confusing drafts. This is the version we approved." Lies, smooth and practiced. The CEO didn't push further, at least not in that moment. The meeting limped along, but the damage was done. I could feel the unease in the room. I'd made a crack in Daniel's perfect facade, but I also knew he wouldn't let it go unpunished. Sure enough, 2 hours later, I got an email from HR. Subject line: performance concerns. Marissa summoned me into her office, her expression a mask of polite professionalism. Daniel tells me you became combative in front of the executive team. That kind of insubordination reflects poorly on the entire department. We need to discuss corrective action. I stared at her in disbelief. Corrective action for telling the truth? Marissa, I said slowly, he presented altered data as if it were mine. That's not insubordination, that's misrepresentation. I have the original files saved. Her smile tightened. Claire, we can't allow baseless accusations against a senior manager. I suggest you focus on teamwork instead of blame. That was it, the final straw. I walked out of her office shaking, but not with fear this time, with clarity. They weren't just ignoring me. They were actively trying to bury me. Fine. If they wanted to bury me, I'd show them exactly what I had buried in return. That night, I opened the insurance folder on my hard drive and organized everything. Emails showing deadlines Daniel had moved, screenshots of him contradicting himself, recordings of his verbal abuse, and the crown jewel, the break room recording of him and Marissa casually discussing how she'd bury complaints. I crafted a detailed report, attaching every piece of evidence, timeline, context, proof. It wasn't just a complaint anymore. It was a dossier. The next morning, while the office buzzed with small talk and clinking coffee mugs, I walked past HR, past Daniel's office, and straight toward the glass door of the CEO's suite. My heart was pounding, but my steps were steady. His assistant looked up, startled. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, sliding the thick folder across her desk. "But tell him this is evidence of misconduct from both Daniel and Marissa. He'll want to see it immediately." She blinked, clearly unsure what to do, but the words, evidence of misconduct, worked like magic. Within minutes, I was ushered into the CEO's office. He was a tall man with a reputation for being detached, almost cold. But when I laid the folder on his desk and said, "I've been documenting everything for the past 6 months," his eyes sharpened. As he flipped through the documents, listening to the recordings I'd queued up on a flash drive, the silence in that office grew heavier. When Daniel's voice played, "Don't worry, they'll never stick. You'll bury them like always," the CEO's jaw tightened. When the recording ended, he looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "Leave this with me," he said finally. "And Claire, not a word to anyone. I'll handle it." I walked out of that office with my pulse racing, knowing something irreversible had just been set in motion. Daniel thought I'd never dare. Marissa thought she could bury me. But now the truth was in the hands of the one person they couldn't manipulate, and it was only a matter of time before the rope tightened around both their necks. The next few days felt like living in the middle of a thunderstorm, waiting for the lightning to strike. Nothing seemed different at first. Daniel strutted through the halls as smug as ever. Marissa still wore her polished HR smile. To the untrained eye, everything was normal, but I could see it, the subtle shifts. The CEO started showing up to our department meetings. He never did that before. He sat in the back, silent, his piercing eyes following every word Daniel said. Daniel would stumble occasionally, tripping over explanations he usually rattled off without effort. Marissa began calling random employees into her office for check-ins. I watched coworkers walk in nervous, then walk out pale, avoiding eye contact. Something was happening behind closed doors. I kept my head down, acted like business as usual, but inside, adrenaline was surging through me. My evidence was out in the open now. It was only a matter of time before the truth surfaced. The first sign came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk when Jenna slid into the chair beside me, whispering so low I almost didn't hear. "Did you tell the CEO?" My chest tightened. "What makes you ask that?" Her eyes darted toward Daniel's office, because Marissa pulled me in yesterday. She asked if I'd ever had issues with him. She kept pressing me like she already knew something. I didn't say much, but, "Claire, someone's finally looking." I nodded slightly, careful not to reveal too much. "Then just tell the truth," That's all. Word spread fast after that. Quietly, cautiously, employees started talking. I overheard snippets in the break room, whispers in the hallways. People who had stayed silent for months were suddenly finding their voices. And Daniel noticed. His behavior shifted from arrogant to erratic. He snapped at people over minor mistakes, slammed his office door more often. One morning he stormed out of Marissa's office, face red, jaw tight, and barked at his assistant to cancel all his meetings. By the end of the week, his charm act was cracking. Meanwhile, Marissa looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her perfect hair was limp, her smile strained. She hovered near the CEO's office more than usual, as if trying to intercept him before he called her in. It was working. The pressure was getting to them. The confirmation came in the form of an email. Not to me directly, but to the entire department. Subject line, Mandatory Compliance Review. The CEO announced a full internal audit of management practices, effective immediately. Every department head, every HR process, every complaint file, reviewed from top to bottom. The email sent shockwaves through the office. People pretended to focus on their screens, but I could feel the tension in the air, the whispered conversations. Everyone knew what this was really about. Daniel called an emergency team meeting that afternoon. He stood at the front, eyes darting nervously, trying to keep his voice steady. "Let's be clear," he said. "This review is routine. Nothing to worry about. Just cooperate fully, and it'll be fine." But his hands betrayed him. They trembled as he gripped the edge of the table. Later that day, I walked past his office and caught him on the phone, voice low but frantic. "They don't have anything. She doesn't have anything. Just stay calm." Oh, Daniel, if only you knew. By Thursday, the atmosphere was suffocating. HR emails flew back and forth. Employees were being pulled into interviews with the audit team, and Daniel's swagger had completely evaporated. He looked like a man waiting for an axe he couldn't see. That night, I sat in my apartment and opened my hard drive again. I listened to the break room recording one more time, Daniel's voice, Marissa's agreement, and felt a cold, sharp sense of satisfaction. For months they had laughed at me, dismissed me, humiliated me. Now, every lie they told was about to collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. The CEO was circling closer, and I could see it in their eyes. They knew it too. The storm wasn't coming anymore, it was here. The summons came on a Monday morning. I'd barely set my coffee down when an email notification popped up on my screen. Meeting with CEO, 10:00 a.m. Attendance required. My stomach flipped. The entire department was CC'd. At 9:55, we filed into the main conference room, a cavernous space reserved only for high-level presentations. The air was thick with unease. Nobody spoke above a whisper. Daniel stood at the front, arms crossed, jaw clenched, trying to project confidence. Marissa hovered near the door, clutching a notepad like it was a shield. Then the CEO walked in. No small talk, no warm-up, just a folder in his hand, and a look that made the room go silent. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice calm but cold. "Over the last several weeks, we've been conducting an internal review of management and HR practices. Today, we're addressing the findings." I felt the tension crackle through the room like static electricity. He placed the folder on the table, opened it, and pulled out a document. "First, let's discuss data integrity." He clicked a remote, and the large screen behind him lit up with side-by-side slides. Daniel's altered projections on the left, my original report on the right. The differences were glaring. Inflated growth, minimized risk, stripped safeguards. "Daniel," the CEO said evenly, "can you explain why your version differs so significantly from the original?" Daniel's face flushed. He cleared his throat. "It must have been a miscommunication. Claire probably sent an early draft, and I—" "Stop." The CEO's voice sliced through the air. "We traced the metadata. The edits were made on your account at 11:43 p.m. the night before the presentation. This was not a miscommunication. This was deliberate." The room went dead silent. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by something raw and ugly. Panic. The CEO turned a page in the folder. Next, HR's handling of employee complaints. His eyes flicked to Marissa. We reviewed every file submitted in the past 2 years. Many were incomplete. Others were missing entirely. Marissa's knuckles whitened around her notepad. Sir, I can explain. He raised a hand. Before you do, let's listen to this. He pressed play on a recording. My recording. Daniel's voice filled the room, smug and careless. Don't worry. They'll never stick. You'll bury them like always. And then Marissa's voice. I've had 3 complaints about you this quarter. You need to be more careful. The sound echoed in the conference room like a gunshot. Marissa went pale. Daniel's eyes darted wildly, searching for some escape, some excuse. But the CEO wasn't finished. This company cannot function when management undermines trust, and HR covers misconduct. What we've uncovered is not only unprofessional, it's unethical. He closed the folder with a sharp snap. Daniel, Marissa, effective immediately, you are both suspended pending termination review. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Daniel shot up from his chair. This is insane. You can't take her word over mine. She's been trying to undermine me for months. He jabbed a finger in my direction, his face twisted with rage. She's manipulating you. This is all a setup. But no one backed him. Not one person. The CEO's voice remained steady. Sit down, Daniel. This isn't about Claire's word. This is about evidence. Evidence you created yourself. For once, Daniel had nothing to say. He sank back into his chair, face ashen. Marissa tried one last, desperate move. Sir, please. I've been loyal to this company for over a decade. If mistakes were made, they were administrative, not intentional. Surely we can. The CEO cut her off with a look that could freeze fire. Your job was to protect employees, not shield toxic managers. You failed, and you lied. Loyalty means nothing when it comes at the expense of integrity. The silence that followed was suffocating. Every employee in that room was watching 2 people who had seemed untouchable unravel in real time. And then for the first time in months, I felt the air clear. It wasn't over yet, but the power dynamic had shifted completely. Daniel and Marissa weren't predators anymore. They were prey, cornered and exposed. The CEO gathered his papers, stood, and addressed the rest of us. I want you all to know, this company will not tolerate abuse, sabotage, or cover-ups. If you've experienced anything similar, my door's open. Effective today, we're rebuilding trust from the ground up. And with that, he left the room, leaving behind a stunned silence. Daniel sat hunched, staring at the table like it had betrayed him. Marissa's hands shook as she scribbled something meaningless on her notepad. Around me, co-workers exchanged glances, relief, shock, even quiet smiles. For the first time, I wasn't the one shrinking in my chair. I was the one sitting tall, steady, calm, because I knew this was only the beginning of their fall. The official announcements came faster than anyone expected. By Wednesday morning, the entire company received an all-staff email. Subject line, leadership changes. I clicked it with trembling fingers, though I already knew what it would say. Effective immediately, Daniel Rhodes and Marissa Calloway are no longer employed with this organization. We are committed to fostering a culture of accountability, integrity, and respect. A new interim HR director will be appointed, and departmental leadership will be restructured to reflect these values. No spin, no vague phrasing, just a blunt acknowledgement. They were gone. The office buzzed like a shaken beehive. People whispered in hallways. Slack channels lit up, and for the first time in months, the conversations weren't about fear. They were about relief. But the real moment came that afternoon. The CEO gathered the department in the same conference room where the confrontation had gone down. He stood at the head of the table, firm and direct. Transparency matters, he said. That's why I want to address this in person. You've all witnessed behavior that doesn't align with our values. It was ignored, even covered up. That ends today. His gaze swept across the room, landing briefly on me before moving on. I expect better. You deserve better, and you'll have it. From this point forward, retaliation will not be tolerated. Speak up, and you will be heard. The words hit me like a wave. For months I'd been dismissed, silenced, gaslit. Now the highest authority in the building was saying the exact opposite. As he dismissed us, something unexpected happened. My coworkers didn't scatter like usual. One by one, they came to me. Jenna was first. She wrapped her arms around me in a quick, fierce hug. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." Others followed, a quiet nod, a murmured thank you. Even a handshake from one of the senior analysts who had always kept his distance. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the problem. I was the proof that standing up mattered. Meanwhile, Daniel and Marissa's downfall was spreading beyond the company walls. By Thursday, LinkedIn lit up with updates. Daniel Rhodes is no longer with company. His once proud profile, full of boastful posts and self-congratulations, was suddenly silent. Marissa's connections dwindled by the hour. Rumors swirled. Other firms had caught wind of what happened, and neither of them would be landing on their feet any time soon. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. Daniel, who thrived on public humiliation, was now publicly humiliated himself. The man who loved cutting people down in meetings was now whispered about in every corner of the industry. Marissa, who had smiled while telling me to be more resilient, was now branded as the HR director who buried complaints and lost her credibility forever. And me? For the first time in years, I felt light, free, like I could breathe again. The CEO didn't stop there. He called me into his office personally later that week. "Claire," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "I want to thank you. It takes courage to do what you did. Without your persistence, this would have gone unnoticed far longer." I swallowed hard. I just wanted it to stop. For everyone. "And it will," he said firmly. "We're restructuring leadership in your department. I'd like you to step into an interim manager role while we assess the long-term fit. You've earned it." For a moment, I just stared at him, stunned. After everything, after months of being silenced, ignored, and torn apart, here was recognition. Not pity, not dismissal. Recognition. I nodded slowly. "Thank you. I won't let you down." Walking out of that office, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Vindication. Not just for me, but for everyone Daniel had stepped on. For every voice Marissa had buried. For every time HR had told us we were overreacting. Their reign of intimidation was over. And the best part? It wasn't my anger or my shouting that ended it. It was the one thing they never expected. Proof. The strangest thing about revenge is that it doesn't always look the way you imagine. When I first walked into HR months ago, clutching my bag and begging for help, I thought justice would mean someone swooping in, fixing everything, making Daniel stop. I thought it would mean safety. I never expected it to mean watching two people who thought they were untouchable implode under the weight of their own arrogance. But that's exactly what happened. In the weeks after their departure, the office changed in ways I didn't even realize were possible. Meetings didn't feel like ambushes anymore. People spoke freely without glancing nervously at the door. Laughter returned. Real laughter, not the kind Daniel forced when he made cruel jokes. Jenna came to work one morning with donuts for the entire team. She placed the box on the table and said, smiling for the first time in months, "Feels like we can actually breathe now." And she was right. The CEO's promise wasn't just words either. He followed through. A new HR director was hired, someone from outside the company, with a reputation for integrity. She set up anonymous reporting systems, held open Q&A sessions, and assured us that every complaint would be investigated independently. For once, HR wasn't a shield for management. It was protection for employees. As for me, stepping into the interim manager role felt surreal. My first team meeting, I half expected someone to cut me off, dismiss my ideas, or roll their eyes the way Daniel used to. But instead, people listened. They asked questions. They respected me. It wasn't about the title. It was about finally being seen. Sometimes, when I stayed late at my desk, I'd think about Daniel. I pictured him sitting alone in some apartment, refreshing his inbox, waiting for job offers that would never come. I pictured Marissa updating her resume, each rejection reminding her that once you lose credibility in HR, you lose everything. And I'd smile, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. They'd spent years building their power on silencing others. In the end, silence was exactly what they were left with. One afternoon, I found myself in the CEO's office again. He'd called me in to update me on the department's restructuring. As I stood to leave, he said something that stopped me in my tracks. "Claire," he said, "I know this experience was painful, but you turned it into something powerful. You reminded this company what accountability looks like. Don't underestimate that." I walked out with those words echoing in my head, because the truth is, I hadn't set out to be powerful. I hadn't set out to be a whistleblower or a hero. I was just a tired employee who wanted the torment to stop. But persistence, patience, and proof had turned me into something else, an example. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the loudest revenge isn't shouting or plotting or lashing out. Sometimes it's surviving, thriving, outlasting the people who tried to bury you, and watching them trip over the very traps they set for you. Daniel and Marissa are gone. My team is stronger, and I'm not just another name on a complaint form anymore. I'm the reason things changed. That's the kind of revenge you don't have to force. It happens naturally, like gravity, and it's the sweetest kind of all.